If you think you've seen the darkest side of reality, you haven't. Like the video, subscribe, and stay with me because what happened that night still doesn't make sense. The flashing blue lights cut violently through the warm, quiet night in Praia da Luz. It was supposed to be just another peaceful holiday resort in Portugal, a place where families came to relax, where nothing ever really happened. But now, everything was happening at once. A woman's voice echoed through the corridors, sharp, panicked, and breaking apart with every word. "They've taken her! They've taken her!" Kate McCann stood barefoot on the cold tile floor outside apartment 5A, her face drained of color, her body trembling uncontrollably. Behind her, the small, dimly lit bedroom told a story that no parent should ever have to tell. The bed was still warm. The blankets were slightly disturbed. But 3-year-old Madeleine McCann was gone. Minutes earlier, everything had seemed normal. Kate and her husband, Jerry McCann, had been dining with friends at a tapas restaurant just a short walk away. It was their routine to take turns checking on the children every half hour. The resort felt safe, quiet, protected. But at 10 p.m., when Kate returned to the apartment, something felt wrong immediately. The door wasn't as she had left it. The window wide open, the curtains fluttering in the night breeze like a silent signal that something had already gone terribly wrong. And Madeleine wasn't there. Within minutes, the resort was thrown into chaos. Staff members ran in every direction, guests left their meals unfinished, and the sound of sirens quickly swallowed the calm of night. Portuguese police arrived, sealing off the area, their voices tense and urgent as they began piecing together the first fragments of a nightmare. Every second mattered, because in cases like this, the first 24 hours are everything. Detective Inspector Goncalo Amaral stepped into the apartment, his eyes scanning every inch of the room. He had seen cases like this before, but something about this one felt different. Too quiet, too clean, no signs of forced entry, no clear struggle. It didn't look like a chaotic abduction. It looked controlled. Outside, search teams spread across Praia da Luz, combing through alleys, beaches, and nearby roads. Helicopters hovered above, their beams slicing through the darkness. Volunteers called out Madeleine's name into the void, praying for an answer. But the night gave them nothing. Inside the apartment, forensic teams moved carefully, collecting fibers, fingerprints, anything that might lead somewhere. Every object was a potential clue. Every detail, a piece of a puzzle that refused to come together. Then came the timeline. Jerry had checked on the children at 9:05 p.m. Everything was fine. A family friend, Jane Tanner, reported seeing a man carrying a child around 9:15 p.m., moving quickly, almost deliberately away from the resort. But in cases like this, witnesses can be unreliable. Memories blur. Fear distorts. And sometimes people see what they want to believe. As the hours passed, the questions only multiplied. Why was the window open, but there were no clear signs someone had entered that way? Why had none of the neighbors heard anything? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, was this really an abduction or something else entirely? By morning, the story had already exploded across Europe. News outlets swarmed the resort. Cameras followed Kate and Jerry everywhere, capturing their grief, their desperation, their pleas to the world. Please, if anyone has her, just bring her back. But behind the scenes, investigators were beginning to notice inconsistencies. Small ones at first, details that didn't quite align, statements that shifted ever so slightly under pressure. Nothing concrete, nothing they could act on, but enough to make them uneasy. Then came the dogs. Specially trained sniffer dogs were brought in from the UK dogs that could detect the scent of human decomposition, even if it had been cleaned. They moved through the apartment slowly, methodically. The room was silent. Every officer held their breath. And then, one of the dogs stopped, right beside the wardrobe. It barked, loud, sharp, unmistakable. Moments later, another alert, this time near the parents' belongings. The air in the room shifted instantly. Because if the dogs were right, it meant something far darker had happened inside that apartment. Something that didn't fit the story of a simple abduction. Investigators exchanged glances. No one spoke, but everyone was thinking the same thing. What if Madeleine McCann hadn't been taken at all? What if the truth was still inside this room? And what they found next would change everything. The moment the dogs alerted inside apartment 5A, the entire direction of the investigation shifted. What had begun as a desperate hunt for an unknown abductor was now quietly evolving into something far more complicated and far more uncomfortable. Behind closed doors, investigators stopped asking who took Madeleine and started asking a different question. What if no one did? Detective Inspector Goncalo Amaral stood silently as the forensic team reviewed the alerts again. These weren't ordinary dogs. They were trained to detect the scent of human decomposition and blood scents that couldn't simply be imagined or mistaken. And they had both reacted. Inside McCann's apartment, near their belongings, it wasn't proof. Not yet, but it was enough to plant doubt. Outside, the world still believed this was a straightforward kidnapping. The media painted a picture of grieving parents and a missing child stolen in the night. Donations poured in. Campaigns were launched. Madeleine's face was everywhere on posters, on television, across continents. But inside the investigation room, the tone was changing. Quietly, carefully, dangerously. The timeline became the next battlefield. Every minute between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. was dissected, re-examined, and questioned. Jerry's check at 9:05 p.m. Jane Tanner's sighting at 9:15 p.m. Kate's discovery at 10 p.m. On paper it worked, but under scrutiny, cracks began to appear. Jane Tanner's description of the man carrying a child was vague, too vague. She couldn't clearly identify his face. His clothing seemed ordinary. Nothing about him stood out enough for a confident identification. Then came a new witness. Another tourist came forward, claiming he had seen a man carrying a child that same night, but in a completely different context. Not fleeing, not suspicious, just walking, carrying his own daughter home. Suddenly, the one solid lead the investigation had started to collapse. If that sighting wasn't the abductor, then who was? Or worse, was there ever an abductor at all? As pressure mounted, the investigators made a controversial move. They turned their attention to Kate and Jerry McCann. It wasn't public, not yet, but the questions became sharper, more direct. Kate was brought in for questioning. Hours passed inside that interrogation room. The same questions repeated again and again, looking for inconsistencies, looking for a break. Why did you leave the children alone? Why was the window open? Can you explain the dog's alerts? Her answers never changed, but her silence at times said more than words ever could. Then came the car. Weeks after Madeleine's disappearance, the McCanns rented a vehicle. It seemed like a normal decision, practical, even. They needed transportation as the search expanded. But when forensic teams examined the car, they found something that made the entire room go still. Traces, microscopic but present, the scent of human decomposition. In the trunk, the implication was immediate, terrifying, because if those traces were real, it suggested something unthinkable, that Madeleine's body had been in that car. A car rented 25 days after she vanished. The timeline didn't just crack, it shattered. Inside the investigation team, tension exploded. Some detectives believed they were closing in on the truth. Others warned they were walking into dangerous territory. Accusing grieving parents without solid proof could destroy the entire case. But the evidence, or what little of it they had, refused to be ignored. The media began to catch on. Rumors leaked. Headlines shifted from "missing girl abducted" to "are the parents hiding something?" Public opinion turned quickly and brutally. Kate and Jerry, once seen as victims, were now under suspicion. Every interview was analyzed. Every gesture, every word, every pause scrutinized. Grief, to some, started to look like guilt. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. Investigators needed something solid, something undeniable. And that's when they made their boldest move yet. They named Kate and Jerry McCann as official suspects. Arguidos. The word echoed across Europe like a shockwave. The parents of a missing child, now formally under investigation for possible involvement in her disappearance. The pressure was unbearable. Inside their circle, relationships began to fracture. Friends who had once supported them started to question everything. The case was no longer just about finding Madeleine. It had become a battle of narratives, two completely different versions of the truth, both fighting to survive. And somewhere in the middle, a little girl was still missing. Then, just as the case seemed to be spiraling toward a single horrifying conclusion, a new piece of evidence surfaced, something that didn't fit the theory, something that pointed away from the parents. A phone record, a signal, placing a known offender, someone with a history, near the resort that very night. Suddenly, the entire case shifted again, because if this lead was real, then everything investigators thought they knew was wrong. The phone's signal changed everything. It came from a number already known to authorities linked to a man with a history of burglary, theft, and disturbing behavior around tourist resorts. On the night Madeleine McCann vanished, his phone had pinged near Praia de Luz. For months, the investigation had circled the McCanns, tightening like a noose built on suspicion, inconsistencies, and fragments of forensic uncertainty. But now, a new name entered the case, one that didn't just challenge the theory. It threatened to destroy it. Detectives moved quickly, quietly. They began reconstructing the movements of this man, tracking his calls, his contacts, his patterns. What they found was unsettling. He had been in the area that night. He had no solid alibi. And just days after Madeleine disappeared, he abruptly changed his behavior. Phones were discarded. Movements became erratic. He left the region without explanation. It wasn't proof, but it was something real, something that didn't rely on interpretation or emotional analysis. For the first time in months, the investigation had a direction that pointed outward, not inward. But there was a problem. Time. Too much of it had already passed. Potential evidence had been lost. Witness memories had faded. The crime scene, if there even was one, had been compromised by the chaos of those first critical hours. Still, authorities pressed forward. Years passed. The case refused to die. Across Europe, Madeleine's face remained one of the most recognized missing persons in modern history. Every new lead reignited hope, and every dead end crushed it again. But behind the scenes, investigators in multiple countries continued to build something slowly, carefully, piece by piece. A profile, a pattern, a suspect. Then, in 2020, a name surfaced publicly. A German national, a convicted criminal, a man who had lived in the Algarve region at the time of Madeleine's disappearance. Christian Bruckner. His past was as dark as it was extensive burglary, drug offenses, and far worse crimes that painted a picture of someone capable of the unthinkable. And then came the details that made everything feel too close to ignore. He had been near Praia de Luz. He had access to vehicles. He had been linked to properties in the area of places isolated enough that no one would hear anything, no matter what happened inside. Witnesses came forward. One claimed Bruckner had spoken about the case in a way that felt wrong. Not like speculation, like knowledge. Another recalled a conversation vague, but chilling, where he allegedly hinted that Madeleine would never be found. The investigation intensified. Searches were conducted across remote locations, wells, abandoned buildings, stretches of land that had gone untouched for years. Each dig carried the weight of a possibility no one wanted to confirm. But nothing definitive was found. No body. No undeniable physical evidence tying him directly to Madeleine. Just a growing shadow of suspicion that felt heavier with every passing year. And then came the statement. German prosecutors announced they believed Madeleine McCann was dead. Not missing. Not hidden. Dead. They claimed they had evidence strong enough to convince them, but not enough to reveal publicly. Not enough to bring immediate closure. Not enough to end the case. For the McCanns, it was another devastating blow. Years of hope, of searching, of refusing to accept the worst, now faced with a reality they couldn't fully see, but couldn't escape either. Still, they never stopped, because without a body, without a confession, without that one final, undeniable piece, the truth remained just out of reach. And that's what makes this case different, because after all the investigations, all the suspects, all the theories, we still don't know exactly what happened inside Apartment 5A that night. Was it a carefully planned abduction by a predator who vanished into the dark? Was it a tragic accident followed by a cover-up that fooled the world? Or is the real story something even more complex, something that hasn't been uncovered yet? The case remains officially unsolved. Files are still open. Leads are still being followed. And somewhere, buried beneath years of speculation and silence, the truth still exists, waiting, and maybe the most how. And ting part of all is this: if the person responsible has never been caught, then they didn't just disappear that night. They walked away, free. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe, because the truth behind the next case might be even darker.